Hello, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. I'm Irina Chismash, Head of Marketing at Castify and your host for this webinar. Even with all the planning and prevention, churn can still take us by surprise. It's like preparing your kid to play in the rain. You equip them with the right clothes and with the right boots and everything, but sometimes they still end up soaked. Believe me, I speak from experience. I live in Bucharest, and the last 4 days were rainy. And my 4 year daughter wanted to play Muddy Puddy in the rain, interpret Peppa Pig, so all the thing. But leaving aside the Peppa Pig and the kids story, today we're gonna discuss about how do we handle post-churn announcements. And I invited with me Samantha Kramer from Data AI, Customer Success Director at Data AI, and Daniel Martin, Head of Customer Success from Try Hack Me. I think I pronounced incorrect your name. I'm sorry for that. They will both share with us what's their playbook and how do they deal with churn announcements. Daniel and Samantha, thank you very much for joining me today. I know that the agenda of CSMs can be very, very busy, so I do appreciate the fact that you took the time to speak with us. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Before we dive into the topic, I want to address a few housekeeping items. This is a recorded event, and everyone who registered will receive the recording on the email. We value your participation, so please feel free to address all your questions. I'll be the one monitoring the question in the chat tab. I'm gonna make sure both Daniel and Samantha answer to your questions. If they make sense in the context of a conversation. If not, we'll allocate 5-10 minutes at the very end for a proper Q&A session. And this discussion doesn't need to end when the event ends. I know that the Castify team is always eager to listen and learn about your unique challenges and discuss how can we tailor our churn prevention methods to better fit your needs. Without further ado, I'm gonna start this conversation with a poll, and I wanna ask our audience who is watching us live, how do you typically respond to churn announcements from a client? I'm gonna go and publish the poll. Bear with me. Hopefully technology does not fail. Okay, you see it? Okay, boom. And let's give it a few minutes for people to basically vote. And then, do you all see it? Do you see the poll? Okay, perfect.
I do.
Okay, perfect. And now let's wait for a few minutes for people to start voting, and then we'll continue with the topic. Ooh. So we have a distribution of immediate action to address their concerns. For the person who mentioned other, if you can please go into more details in the chat. I'm curious, how do you handle this? How do you handle this part? So it seems that everybody is reacting. Or focus on maintaining a positive relationship for potential return. Okay, that's a good one as well. I'm curious, and that's a question for both Samantha and Daniel, on how do you handle this and how do you keep the door open for people to come back. I'll say a few more seconds, and then we can start. Okay, we have a fair distribution between immediate action and focusing on maintaining a positive relation. Samantha, I want to start the conversation with you. what early signs of churn do you have on your radar? And what's that aha moment when you realize things might not be heading in the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about churn is it can, like, the signs of it can happen at all different points in the customer life cycle, right? A really early sign of churn is that the onboarding wasn't successful. So every company should really have their main KPIs that are internal that you're looking at. Was this a successful onboarding for a new customer, or was it a little bit rocky, or was it unsuccessful, right? And really evaluating yourselves, evaluating with the customer's feedback, how did it go? So that's what I would say is like sign number one. If it's a new customer, not necessarily a renewal, but a new customer that you could tell an onboarding was rocky, you know your internal statistics, the likelihood that this customer is going to churn is probably pretty high. And at that point, it's all right, let's get the team together to figure out how can we turn this around. I think another sign, maybe more at the midpoint of the relationship, is how deeply are they engaged with you or your product, right? Of course, every product is different. If it's a really high touch relationship, are they engaging with you? Is it easy to get a call booked with them? Have you met them before? How aligned are you with their goals? Are we tracking towards their goals and the reason that they purchased the product? Or is it the opposite? Is it also that, maybe they're really highly engaged with the product, but they're not speaking to you? So those different types of adoption and engagement signals is another way that I would put it. And then I think the last one that's maybe the biggest signal to me is, do we as the CSM team and does the customer know where we stand in terms of the return on the investment that they spent with our product? So with whatever they spent with us, are they getting that output and then some, or is it lower? Very oftentimes the churn signal is that they just don't know. So working with the customer to back into how we can identify, yes, in fact, this was worth the X amount of dollars that you spent, or maybe not, then you can really get an understanding of how to forecast the renewal, is what I would say in terms of churn signals.
I'm curious. Speaking about the third signal that you mentioned, when do you start the discussion about what's the ROI that your solution is providing? When do you start this discussion? At the beginning, in the middle of the journey, where how do you handle this?
Ideal is that we start at the beginning. So the second a customer signs, hopefully sales knows it, right? Here's the reason why they signed and what the overall impact to the business will be because they purchased this product and what business outcomes they hope to drive by having this product in place. That's ideal state, but that is not always the case, right? But I would say as early as we can, we should be asking about those things. And at least if the customer doesn't totally have the path, that's what the CSM's job is maybe we know what the output should be, but we have to hold their hand and coach them on how to actually get there by leveraging our products and services, because obviously we're the experts in the products, the customers aren't. They should hopefully have the right idea. And then we're those guiders and storytellers to get there. But I also think that, let's say you do get it at the very beginning, continuing to recap it on almost every touch point. Maybe if it's not a super high touch customer, you're having a business review halfway through the subscription, certainly recapping it there, getting a health check and a pulse check on, are we driving that on that phone call? But if it is a really high touch customer, then yeah, monthly touch points, let's actually track towards those goals and make sure that there's mutually agreed upon at all levels of the customer of what those goals are and how we're driving towards them, and then tracking to the specific dollar amount of the investment.
Do you always manage to put a dollar amount on to the value that the solution provides?
No. And sometimes customers don't know, right? It really depends on who you're speaking to. And I think that does also tie into being able to understand how to forecast if a customer is going to churn or not. Because if you're speaking to someone that really may not know, and that's okay sometimes, right? You don't always need to 100% have all of that information. But of course, that's the best case scenario. But no, we don't always get that. I wish we did. We try our very hardest, but we don't always get that.
And when you have multiple stakeholders involved, and some of them can have different objectives, how do you deal with that? How do you prove the value when you have multiple stakeholders?
Ideal state is really digging into each one of those objectives. So sometimes we'll do an ROI analysis for 3 different buying centers. and make sure that those buying centers have a really solid understanding. The hope is that, like, I think in certain scenarios, you have different budget centers and you know the amount of dollars that have been allocated. That then would be how you would back into the ROI, maybe for that specific group. Ideal state, you could use the overall contract value to, use it for all different stakeholders because it's going so well that hopefully it covers the cost and then some, right? But usually if you can tell one or two really strong stories that back into it, you're going to be pretty good. And I think also what I've seen is that even just going above and beyond to really explain the story on how to get that return on investment proven to the customers, they're so appreciative of you going through that effort and that work to show them that, because then they can take it, bring it to their CFO and say, it was worth it, right? It makes their lives so much easier. And what I found is when we present this information to our customers, they're so thankful and really appreciative and impressed also. It just makes you look really good. Like you're thinking like they're executives and want them to look good, obviously, too.
Danielle, what's the situation in your case? I want to remain on the signals of the churn, and then we're gonna discuss what's the game plan when things are not going as expected. So, Danielle, over to you. What other signs do you notice? What's the story in your case?
Yeah, I think Samantha covered it quite comprehensively. The red flags can appear at any stage of the journey, and I think they can be they generally are quite unique to the individual client, which is where the client relationships come into play. Your CSM should understand what a red flag is for your client. We have clients that when we're doing their client success plans, their idea of ROI is just getting people to use it in the first 3 months, or having 80% seat allocation on our platform. So, there's definitely quite a lot of triggers for churn that we can see that are quite unique to the product or unique to that client specifically. But I think it comes down to knowing your customer well and knowing what's normal for them. And also, as Samantha mentioned, the importance of tracking that ROI and understanding if your client is getting it. And if not, being able to jump in and make it easy for them to sell your product when it comes around to requesting budget to renew.
Let's remain on. Okay, we identify the signals, but when we notice that things aren't going the way we expected, Samantha, you mentioned at the beginning, maybe it happens in the onboarding. What do we do then if we had a bumpy onboarding? What's the strategy? How do we turn things?
I think just confronting it head on, being transparent about maybe why it was a bumpy onboarding. Could have been our fault, could have been a little bit on the customer. Maybe they weren't as reachable or accessible as they said they would, or didn't understand the time that's required to onboard. Or maybe there's some other, factor contributing to it. But I think really just calling it out and understanding what do we need to do to improve this. You all just spent oftentimes a significant amount of budget on a product. We obviously want to make sure that it works for you really well, and that, it's not a waste of money, outside of obviously us having our own incentives to make sure that it's a good experience, and getting feedback, right? That's first and foremost. I'm a very big believer that you should always be collecting feedback 30, 60, and 90 days after a customer has been onboarded. So you should know pretty early on if it's been going well, outside of just product adoption, if that's a key metric for the product that you're selling and the customer should be adopting. So if you need to start over kind of in some ways doing that. I do also find that there's usually a correlation between a rocky onboarding and a change in customers' goals and focus areas. So usually it's not very common that an onboarding goes poorly because of no reason other than like a lack of responsiveness. It's usually because someone was really busy, some change happened, and they had to focus on more important or pressing items. And maybe that does impact the journey that they're going to then have with you and and that product. So uncovering that and reframing the story if we need to, engaging with other teams if we need to. And, like I said, kind of starting over if that's the scenario when it's really early on.
Danielle, in your case, what's the game plan? when you notice the signals and things aren't going as expected?
Yeah, I think from our stage, from our side, we just want to get the client on a call and understand. I think it's information gathering from our side. We want to understand exactly what their problems were, and gather that feedback so that we can make improvements in the future. And then we also want to mitigate any fallout from the problems that they face during that onboarding to try and turn them around, because clients that don't, first impressions count, and if they don't have a good impression first time, it's quite hard to change that opinion without some real hard work and and trying very hard to change the perception by doing a good job for them and making them feel that the solution is is serving their needs.
What do you do when the implementation fails? And usually it all depends on company to company. But some clients or some companies consider the onboarding starts after the implementation. But if things are stuck in the implementation phase due to several reasons, how do you make the client successful in that case?
Yeah, I think it depends on exactly what the blocker is. There's definitely times at implementation where it's very clear that they're a bad fit customer, and potentially they were, sold the dream by your sales team, or they thought that the product did something that it didn't, and now you're in a situation where you're blocked. And I think understanding what that blocker is the first thing to do. You have to understand exactly what it is that's causing the problem, and stopping this implementation from moving forward, and then being realistic with whether you can actually unblock this. Is this something we can get over? And if so, how? And putting a game plan. And I think you also need to have the buy-in of the customer as well. With that game plan going forward, you don't want to be forcing next steps on them and saying this is what we need to do. It's a case of, these are my suggestions, are these viable? If we start down this road, do you commit to also putting the effort in so we can get over this and moving forward? But yeah, I think that's the key things that I would do in order to try and overcome and turn that around.
Now let's shift gears from signs to actually clear intention, because there are moments when churn happens. So when a client says that they are churning, what are your next steps, Danielle? How do you handle this announcement?
Yeah, I don't see that necessarily as a definite that they're going to churn. I think it's the start of a negotiation. And, customers can say that they're going to churn for any number of reasons, right? It can be a cry for help. It can be a trying their luck. They want a discount. They know they've not got the budget. Or it can be, they're very angry about a recent situation, and, they've decided that they're just gonna leave. But in reality, these are all things that you can overcome by truly understanding the core reasons behind why they've told you that they're looking to churn. So I think the first thing that we try and do at TryHackMe is we want to get them on a call. We don't, whatever they've said, let's park it, but let's get in front of them and seek to understand and be curious. If they really want to leave us, we're not going to chain them to us, right? It might just be that the product is not fit for purpose for them anymore. They genuinely don't have the budget. But I think, getting the client on a call and understanding the real reason why they've advised you they're looking to churn is key. And also leveraging the relationship that you have with them to truly get to the real reason, because a lot of clients will say, oh, it's budget, we just don't have the budget. But in reality, if they had the budget last year, there's, I want to dig a bit deeper into that. Okay, talk to me about why there's no budget this year. Because quite frankly, if a client gets the return on investment and they see the value in your product and it's doing what they want it to do for them, they will renew. So if they're not renewing, it could genuinely be a budget issue, but it might also be that they just don't feel that they're getting that return on investment, but they just don't want to say it. So, yeah.
Samantha, I'd love to hear from you as well. How do you respond to those churn announcements?
Yeah, I think Danielle covered a lot. I would say my immediate response and what I ask my team to do is set up a phone call. It's always the first thing. And if you have a good enough relationship, they'll say yes. I'm not saying that our customers always want to hop on and talk about breaking up with us live. But when we can get that opportunity, I do try to. And to Danielle's point, really just digging into the why. Is it product related? Is it success related? Is it budget that they're telling us? What's the real reason? In the scenarios that I said before, if you're tracking towards business goals and ROI and really understand the outcome that the relationship's been able to provide, then this conversation should be very straightforward. Either we did not hit the goals or the budget has changed. And if it has changed, how? Can we then get into negotiations of, hey, we really impacted, the way that you guys operate. What are you going to do without us for the next term? Is there some way that we can figure out working together and then understanding what direction we can go from there? Of course, collecting feedback, if it is something that's related to the way that, the partnership went, that's product related or success related, overall customer experience and journey related, taking that feedback, logging it, and making sure that we really review it and understand it as the management team and as the leadership team at the company. But I would say first and foremost, to Danielle's point, also like leveraging the relationship that you have with your customer, which is hopefully a good one, and a comfortable one and one full of trust, to really get out of them, who made the decision to cancel, why, and is it valid or is it invalid? Because I do think that very oftentimes someone gets told that their budget is being adjusted and then they'll just go and start canceling vendors without taking a second to think about what impact did this vendor have on our year and on our results. And is it actually critical or can we survive without it? It's a nice to have. If it is critical and if the CSM team knows that it's critical because we've been tracking towards the goals, we have data to back it up. I also think sometimes you can turn these churn situations around by actually just telling the story and really sharing that information with the customer and have them have the aha moment of like, you're right. Maybe we do actually need this, but actually I only have like 50% of the budget I previously had. We'd rather take 50% than 0%, right? So that's how I would say generally is my knee-jerk reaction is phone call, possible, and then talking through the different avenues and scenarios that you could go down.
I would, and what do you do when the customers are actually ghosting you? And I think we are not sure if we have a question, Landre, not sure if I got it right. I'm going to push it for you to review it. So it's within your book, oftentimes clients that are not willing to engage can be mentally draining. Is there ever a time where it's best to shift focus away from certain clients? And if you have a client not willing to engage, what are your next steps? So I'll start with, okay, and if they do not manage to engage, because it's a scenario, usually they announce it, or there are situations when they announce it and then they basically ghosted. And you don't have the chance to do that offboarding call. What do you do then? How many times do you insist? Danielle?
Yeah. I think it's important not to flog a dead horse is the saying. I think it is. And, if somebody does not want to engage with you, I think, one follow-up for me and my team is sufficient. I think if they're not going to engage with you, and I've done it before, right, when I've cancelled subscriptions and they've reached out for feedback and, I just don't have the time or it just isn't on the top of my priority list. And I think if somebody wants to engage with you and give you feedback, they will. And so I think when we're sending emails, there is always that, oh, well, maybe they didn't get the email, but obviously we track our emails. So if we can see that it's been opened and been read, I think one follow-up for us is sufficient. And then we will just move on because there's better ways to spend our time than trying to chase customers that just don't want to speak to us.
If I would, because you mentioned, Danielle, that there are customers that basically announce the churn as a method to renegotiate the price, or maybe they are not actually churning. How often does it happen to turn to flip or to convince a customer to stay? How many times does this happen? And okay, is it enough a conversation or one conversation?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's quite rare that a customer stays if they genuinely want to churn with us. And I think it's because when customers churn with us, it's indicative of a reason that we cannot solve. Whereas most of the customers that's, they stay with us because they have a great experience and we manage that quite carefully. But if they are leaving us, it's genuinely because it's a budget that we cannot overcome. There is no discount we can offer. And or the product itself just is not fit for purpose for them anymore. So we always use it as an opportunity to gather that feedback and feed that back in. But yeah, for us, if a genuine churn comes about, it's often that it's quite hard for us to turn that around because it's generally something we can't affect. If it's something we can affect, and we see that, you mentioned people sort of trying their luck, or using it as a reason to negotiate. We get customers that sort of will allude to the fact that maybe they may not be able to renew this year because of budget. And that for us is generally a conversation about discounts. That's what that leads to. I've done it before, especially like with your telecoms or like your phone bill when you're looking to leave. The first thing I do is ring up and say that I'm going to cancel. And I don't think it's just myself that does that. And the first thing they do is offer you a discount. And I go, oh, thank you very much for that. And you know that you're going to renew regardless. So yeah, I think that's the situation. But for me, when clients genuinely say categorically, we're leaving you, it generally means there's not something that we can really turn around at that point.
Both of you mentioned collecting feedback and trying basically to understand what happened. I want to understand what's the process that you have in place. How do you collect and how do you make the most out of it? Do you involve other teams into the feedback loop sessions? Samantha?
Yes, we do collect it. And we actually have multiple teams that are involved in the collection process, like customer marketing and customer experience, product marketing. We will share it with our executive team once we've had once we've collated a lot of different amounts of feedback. Typically something we do at the end of every quarter to just assess, are there any trends here or themes, and things that really are within our control that we can adjust. So in short, yes, we absolutely do that. And I think for me personally, right, I'm looking out for anything that I can actually control, which is, how my team is operating, what the customer experience really looks like, the way that we're framing the value story and value delivery. But the way that's at a very high level. At a more individual level with the CSM specifically and with my management team, we do something that I've called a churn autopsy, which is, at the end of every month or every quarter, why did this customer churn? What could we have done? Do we feel at the end of the day we did everything we possibly could to save this account? Or was it, bound to be because it wasn't a great, customer profile or whatever it might be? And in these churn autopsy conversations, it's usually myself, the manager, and the CSM. And we'll just have a conversation of what were our key learnings here? What could we have done better? Was there some point in the relationship that we missed an opportunity to really turn things around? Or are we closing the door and hopefully they come back one day and we've done everything we possibly can?
Danielle, how do you guys deal with this with the process of collecting feedback? How do you make sure that you make the most out of it?
Yeah, so our feedback is generally fed back to our product team. So any sort of feature requests, any ideas that our clients have, we feed them directly into our products. It's almost like a pre-roadmap, I suppose, and then our product managers will have a look at that. They will, upvote it and decide which ones are viable, which ones aren't, and we'll have a catch up with our product team. I think once a month where we go through all the feedback that's been processed that month, and the product manager gives us an update as to which ones are happening, which ones aren't, and so we can give an update to our clients. Also, clients that seem particularly happy, or clients that we feel give us a case study, we direct those to our marketing team. But we're consistently asking for feedback at all points of the customer journey, and every time we get on a call with the client, I think it's about fostering an environment of curiosity where your CSMs just want to know more, the why behind the why. Never take the first answer is our approach.
Have you ever had a piece of exit feedback that was a real game changer for how you do things?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, so my business, not my business, the business I work for is a scale. We're in a scale up situation. So, when we were starting our CS team, I think I came into it assuming that we had product market fit, and that all of our clients were using our product because it was the perfect fit for them and completely solved their use case. But I think the first time that I got feedback and I realized that it was actually a bad fit customer, and by that time we had enough understanding as to what makes a client successful and what use cases make a client sticky and make them make them come to renewal. It was a massive mind blow for me when I was like, oh my goodness, we actually have a big bank of customers where actually this specific use case is likely to lead to churn. And then that became a wider conversation in the business where I was fed that back to sales, and we were sort of trying to figure out, like, you can never tell a salesperson to turn down business. I think it's quite a hard conversation to have. But it's kickstarted that conversation where I realized that actually customers that want more of a free roam approach with our product, unstructured, just sort of want to pay for it and then see how it goes without any milestones or goals, that equals generally a churn risk because they don't have any goals. So you can't really control or affect much throughout their journey.
Speaking about product market fit, how do you, when the product is sold to a non-ICP, how do you, and from the beginning that the client, it's not, most probably he won't be successful. Do you consider it do you label it as a churn, or do you basically consider it an isolated case? How do you combine those two, non-product market fit with the churn?
Yeah, I think for us, we would always try and do our best to affect it. So if we know that particular use case isn't a general fit and will likely lead to churn, we'll try and turn things around and funnel them towards use cases or utilizing the system in a way that makes them successful. But if we genuinely feel that, they've purchased it, and we don't understand why they have, because it's not, it really isn't a great fit for them, we'll likely move them to Tech Touch or put them in a tier that, we expect will churn, because I think it's really important when you've got volume to spend your time wisely and identify these types of clients early on, do what you can, and then sort of funnel them to a low touch tier.
Samantha, what's your take when it comes to product market fit and churn and selling the product to non-ICPs?
I would say, obviously it happens, right? And it's always tricky for sure. Usually, honestly, an approach that we will take is actually try to find other individuals at the company that are the ICP and just get into sales mode. And the CSMs will put their sales hats on and we'll say, all right, guys, we are now SDRs and AEs. Let's go find other people at the company that can really leverage this. And really work on kind of like a new business use case. Now, that said, we also are very conscious of time spent. If it's not worth that effort and it's really not going to go the way we think it could after a couple of attempts, I'm not saying we'll spend months and months on this if it's, just not going to work out, then, we manage our time, we manage customer expectations, we try to align with them on other potential use cases that could benefit them or could benefit one of their colleagues because the budget's already been spent on it. And really try to lean into that motion and make the most of, what they've purchased. But we won't, reach out to them incessantly and force our product down their throat if it just isn't going to work. But of course, there's other things that we can offer outside of just the product itself, right? Being thought leaders in the industry that we work in. And there's always some benefit and value to that. And, building up strong professional relationships as well is always a benefit when you have customers, regardless of ICP.
I want to address two questions that were on the question tab. After gathering all the feedback from the customers that are about to churn, how do you communicate that internally with other departments? How do you coordinate with other stakeholders in your company to make sure that they hear the feedback and act on it? Daniel, want to pick this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on how much the customer's worth to us, honestly. I think if we have a customer and they're spending very little and they tell us they're going to churn, I wouldn't likely get my exec team involved or try and shout about in the company to try and get something to happen. We're always trying to affect positive outcomes for all of our customers. So the CSMs would go to the end of the earth to try and do what they can to turn this around. But I think involving other teams, we definitely feed back data on churn consistently to our exec teams and to everybody in the business. But yeah, from my perspective, unless it's high revenue and it will be a major loss, I wouldn't go forcing any immediate changes in the product or anything like that. So I think it depends on what the customer's spending with us and how important the customer is to us.
Okay, we have one more question. Also, who's the best person to have the offboarding calls? Because we discussed about the offboarding calls. Is it CSMs? Is it team managers? Considering they might want to share the feedback about the CSMs too. So what's the best stakeholder when it comes to the offboarding calls? Samantha, you want to pick this?
Yeah, really good question. Honestly, I do think it depends. But I actually think it's really important for managers to hear the feedback directly from the customers. I do also think that another avenue is customer experience, if that's a role that's available at your company. Those teams are generally, responsible for understanding the voice of the customer and making sure that the experience is aligned with the product offering. So we do that from time to time as well. But I would say, kind of depending on the ACV, the, personnel on the customer side, the type of client they're leveling, the CSM, the manager, the director, the VP within the success organization, or going the customer experience route. Every so often, I'll also have like product managers at my company reach out to me and say, do you mind if we reach out to so-and-so customer that either has churned or you've told us they're going to churn? We'd love to get product specific feedback. So we do that also, but I would say like my actual approach is that the customer success organization, like I require us to reach out and ask to have those phone calls. But of course we're strategic about like who's on that actual phone call.
And how do you advocate when, for instance, the client announced that he's gonna churn? Maybe he had several feature requests, let's say. How do you advocate for him in front of the product in the product team? Because usually we see this the case where the product team doesn't necessarily prioritize or doesn't want to alter the product roadmap just only because some of the customers, or even if a strategic customer requests it. How do you, and then the CSM is in the middle. How do you advocate and how do you support the cause for the client?
Look, I think there's proper avenues for feedback. And I think that feedback should also not be shared ad hoc. It should be shared at a specific time that is set for, we are going to tell you reasons for churn feedback or overall customer feedback and feature requests that could be tied to revenue. Meaning customers are going to churn, this dollar amount is going to churn because we don't have this product feature, or if we get in front of it and we build this product feature, we can retain X amount of dollars. Again, similar to how we work with our customers, we need to tie a revenue amount to everything that we're asking. It needs to make sense. It can't just be a nice to have. And I do think, I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but if you want to be able to scale as a business, you can't alter your product because of one customer's feedback. It needs to be a real, a large amount or a significant amount of feedback that's, again, tied to dollars for us to be able to reasonably advocate for that change. Usually it is, right? It's not usually that there's like a million different one-off asks. There's always a theme or they're connected to each other. So I would say how we do it is really coming prepared with all the information that we know the PMs will inevitably ask, right? How many customers? What's the total ACV? When are they up for renewal? How much runway would we have if we were to put this on a roadmap? Would it be okay if it's on the roadmap that's in 6 months from now, right? So understanding all of those nuances when you're going into a meeting with your product organization or your executive leadership organization to advocate, you need to be very prepared. So hopefully that answers the question.
For sure it does, and is in the context. So I wanna ask, what's your preferred way of gathering the churn feedback? Is it calls or written feedback? And I'm asking this as sometimes sharing feedback in written can make the feedback more objective. In calls, especially with the CSMs, customers can be subjective. What do you think works best? Samantha, do you want to take it? And I'm curious, what's your take, Danielle?
Personally, I would say both. So, like I said before, we ask for feedback live on a phone call. If we can get it, we'll take it. But we'll also still send like survey at the end and collect written feedback. And I think also, customers are willing to type out feedback as well. Of course, we'll accept that too if they won't join us on a phone call. So really, my answer is both. And if the customer's okay with it, also recording those phone calls and sharing with the customer, your feedback is really important for our product development and the overall customer experience that we're providing. Do you mind if we record this phone call? Usually they're fine with it.
Danielle, how do you do it?
Yeah, I completely agree with Samantha there. Both anything we can get, we will take it. And the preference is a phone call, because I think at that point, you can really dig a lot deeper and, try and get to that why behind the why. But, some customers just prefer providing written feedback, and any feedback is good feedback. So we will take as much as we can. And with respect to recording calls, again, I'm total advocate for that. If you can, we use Gong, which joins all of our calls, and it's been invaluable, especially in those cases where you have like Samantha was mentioning, themes. So you will know what themes are, what product features your customers would love. And in order to sort of build that case, if you have a customer that's churning and they're explaining to you why they needed that feature and that's the reason for them leaving, having that recorded and just tagging your product manager in or tagging whoever's responsible, hearing it from the customer's mouth can go a long way, as opposed to just us constantly saying the same thing over and over again.
I'm going to address one more question from the audience. The customers that you managed to save, were they successful, and did they renew in the next renewal? How went the relationship with them after the churn announcement? Samantha, do you want to pick it?
Sure. Yes, they were successful. It isn't great business to renew a customer that's fighting you to churn. It definitely shouldn't be a fight. It needs to make business sense for them to renew with you and for you to also put in the effort to save them, because saving a churned customer is a lot of work. Usually, in my experience, once the save has taken place and you've gotten all of the skeletons out of the closet, so to speak, those can become some of your best customers, because you've already gotten to like the darkest part of the relationship you can get to. You've had your breakup. You realize that actually you love each other and you want to get back together. And as long as, like the champion stays and the economic buyer is bought in and the account team does a good job, it's usually a really fantastic relationship moving forward. I've found that some of those are, our closest friends in terms of customers and great advocates for us as the account team and the product. And also serve as like really fantastic product partners. Those are the ones that we can always get feedback from, because again, we've already broken up and gotten back together. There's nothing left for us to, fight over.
Danielle, do you have something to add on what Samantha was saying?
I think she covered it beautifully. I think generally from us, if you've managed to save a customer, it's because you've overcome their objection, right? You've understood exactly what their problems are, what's blocking them, why they're looking to leave, and you've managed to overcome that somehow. So by managing to overcome it, there's a level of trust there where they know that you've got their best interest at heart, and you can start from scratch and really get to grips with using that open lines of communication to understand what their goals are going forward and help them achieve it. So I actually think, if you do, as Samantha said, if you manage to save a customer, it can really bolster that relationship and make it stronger than before.
How do you nurture customers that churn? But and would you like to come back at some point? How do you keep in touch with them? So customers that churn, but you still want to keep in touch with them. How do you nurture them moving forward? Samantha?
I think it depends, right? I think a really easy way of nurturing a relationship is just sharing information when it comes to your mind, like a news article that you saw that could be really relevant of, hey, I was just thinking of you. This article made me think of you, something like that. Or maybe you have a product launch that you know they'd be really interested in. Things like that. I think depending on your company, also, if you do events or webinars, inviting them to those things from you personally. And of course, if your organization has a sales team and there's resources available, facilitating those relationships and making sure that the AE that is assigned to the account really gets the full handover of what that relationship looked like and why they want to maintain it on their side, right? Maybe they just absolutely loved CSM Danielle. And CSM Danielle was really special because she connected with them regularly with really relevant content that has nothing to do with maybe the product that you currently have. So I would say, share that with the AE and make sure that they really understand like what made the customer tick in a positive way, and facilitate some of that. But I would say really continue to invite them to events and webinars and things that are available, share blog content if your company has that available. And, I am a very big advocate of you never know when your path will reconnect with someone. So maintaining a positive relationship with your churned customers or even employees who could become customers, things like that, you just never know. So always ending on a positive term and maintaining as much of the relationships that you can through LinkedIn or through email or through text message, whatever it might be, is really important for your own professional development as well.
Danielle, do you have anything to add? Do you have a different playbook? How do you nurture customers that churned, and but you still want to keep in touch with them?
Yeah, so actually we don't as a department. So I think when you're dealing with the high volume of clients, which we are, I think from our perspective, unless it was a really large account, we wouldn't have the resources to do that. Generally, what we do is when we lose a customer, we have a cooling off period for around a month where the CSM has the opportunity to sort of do a win back with that customer. At that end of that period, if we have not managed to, the customer says, look, we might come back, but we might come back in a year, 6 months, we would pass that client to sales and say, hey team, there's a lead for you. This customer said they might come back in 6 months. So the salesperson would set a task in their calendar and give them a call in 6 months. I think as well, our marketing team, right? They're on our marketing lists. They're on, our marketing team has the data. So the marketing team would naturally keep them flooded with wonderful content and things that we want to share with them. So I think it depends. If you've got a company that's got quite a small amount of high value clients and you lose one of those relationships can run a lot deeper and, you can almost become friends. I've had it in in companies where you've had a real handful of really high value customers and one's left and you're like, no, it hurts my heart to see you go. And yeah, you may keep in contact personally, but I think when you're looking en masse and in volume, it's quite difficult to, on a personal note, keep in touch with all the customers that have left.
You mentioned win-back strategies. I think some of them were already shared, but I feel the need to summarize it. In your case, Danielle, which are the win-back strategies in terms of tactics and initiatives? How do you try to convince the customers to stay? It was one of the things you mentioned, the offers. What else?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Samantha said earlier with, you shouldn't be fighting a customer to renew. If your product has met their needs, they will renew. It's as simple as that. If it hasn't, or it's just not working for them, they will not want to renew. And so I think the first win-back strategy is objection handling, but information gathering, right? Getting to the crux of what that objection really, really is to renewing and seeing if it is something that can be overcome. If it can, working with them to overcome it. If it can't, acknowledging that and not trying to force it. Other win-back strategies, I think discounts are great, offers are great, but I don't think that solves the problem, right? Just cutting discount is not really ever the solution for me. I think if they could pay full price last time, they can pay full price this time. It's not going to make them any happier. If budget's an issue, I think it's better to, understand that in more detail rather than just blanket going to a discount. And we often find that when you deal with the right people, so if you deal with the procurement teams, they're actually already planning for all of their vendors to have increases in their prices. Instead of discounting, you can negotiate, multi-year deals with incremental increases. And I think sometimes people jump straight to discount when in reality, it often doesn't make people stay unless it was like 50% or something.
I wanna tackle two more. We have one more question from the audience, but before I address that, I wanna ask you: how do you ask for referrals, or do you ask for referrals for customers that are churning? Were you ever successful in getting maybe new business or maybe customer CSQLs from customers that are churned? Samantha, I'll start with you, and then I'll pass it to Danielle.
Yeah, we'll only ask for a referral if it's churn for a reason that we're still ending the relationship very much on a positive note with that point of contact. I would say it's very point of contact specific to ask for a referral as well. And to the only times that I've seen successful referrals from a churned customer is because that individual just adored their experience in working with us. A lot of referrals come from customers that have left a company and moved to a different company, and they're their own referrals, or customers that, the churn reason was out of their hands, or it was, it just legitimately didn't work out for a variety of reasons. And then one of their friends or their colleagues or someone is asking them, who is the best at X, Y, and Z vendors that you've used, and then we'll get referrals that way. But, if it's ending on a very positive note, we'll say please send people our way. We'd love to work within your network, and hopefully our paths will cross again soon. And it's been successful in that way. But I wouldn't say that we have necessarily a really formalized process in place to track it. I actually think that that's part of a broader discussion in sales and customer success is tracking referrals. I know there are some startups that are trying to tackle that problem because it's definitely a highly valued way of getting new logos. But that's what I would answer for that.
Danielle, what's your experience with asking for referrals?
Yeah, I have to say, honestly, Samantha pretty much covered everything there. And I think, it is quite simple. If they've had a positive experience, you ask them. If they haven't, then don't, because it's unlikely you're going to get one. And I think, that's pretty much it from me. I think that Samantha covered it in great detail.
I know that Samantha has a hard stop, and I'm watching closely the clock. Before we wrap it up, we still have one question. And not sure if I understood it correctly. So, Nirav, if you are still online and you feel like we didn't answer, please complete on the chat. Or if you are not, we'll make sure that we come back to you. The question is: does the team measure structural churn, that which is not influenced by CSM, versus controllable churn, and any best practices?
I can get feedback on this one. I would say we measure it and we track it more for our own knowledge. And to support, honestly, CSMs that are working so hard, that are doing so much to save their customers. And sometimes it really has nothing to do with them. I like to try my hardest to know when those are the situations and still cheer my team along in saying, again, like I said earlier, you've done everything you possibly can. This churn, I've seen you do everything you possibly can. This is not related necessarily to you or your work or something you could control. I wouldn't say I necessarily have best practices associated with it because it's still churn, right? It's still revenue that we're losing. So, there's nothing more than I can really add to that specifically, but yes, I do keep tabs on it. And I think it is an important data set to be aware of. Also for your own numbers and your own targets. How far off are you with, what you're referring to as structural churn compared to controlled churn? And I think also, being really conscious of what you're assigning to structural churn, make sure there's no bias in there and that it really is truly structural churn would be the other thing that I would say, but that's generally how I think about it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to wrap things up because I know that you, Samantha, have another appointment, and I promised that I'm going to give you at least 5 minutes break because before you jump into the other event that you have to attend. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for taking the time. I know that both of you are pretty busy and I really appreciate it. Thank you. I want to thank the audience who was online with us and asked all the questions. Connect with all the three of us. And for further questions, I know that both Samantha and Daniel will be available. Thank you very much and have an awesome day ahead. We keep in touch. See you at a later event. Bye,
Thanks.
guys.
Bye.